tonight at 10, the winter plans for tackling COVID in England, more vaccinations and the possibility of tougher measures. If the NHS in England starts to struggle, working from home, mandatory face masks and vaccine passports could be introduced. A booster jab will be offered to 30 million people across the UK, including the over 50s, healthcare workers and those with underlying health conditions.
COVID is still out there. The disease, sadly, still remains a risk, but I'm confident that we can keep going with our plan.
And it's confirmed that 12 to 15-year-olds in all parts of the UK will be offered one dose of vaccine. We'll be asking if the booster programme is making the best use of tens of millions of vaccine doses, also tonight. Job vacancies throughout the UK have hit a record high as the economic recovery continues. In Afghanistan, we talked to some of the thousands of women who can't return to work and fear for their safety.
Cristiano Ronaldo's in the middle and he scores!
And in the Champions League tonight, despite that Ronaldo goal, it's a tough night for Manchester United.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News Channel, British relay silver medalist CJ Ujah returns a positive B sample for banned substances, confirming his initial results from the Tokyo Olympics.
Good evening. The plan for dealing with COVID during the autumn and winter months in England will involve booster vaccinations for tens of millions of people and reserve powers for mandatory vaccine passports if they are considered necessary. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, unveiling the plans in Downing Street today, warned that COVID remained a risk. So from next week, a third dose of vaccine, that's a booster jab, will be offered to 30 million people across the UK, including the over 50s, healthcare workers and those with underlying health conditions. It is confirmed that 12 to 15-year-olds in all parts of the UK will be offered one dose of COVID vaccine. And in England, if the NHS begins to struggle, tougher restrictions could include working from home again, mandatory wearing of face coverings and vaccine passports. Our first report is by our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, and there are some flashing images coming up.
Adapting to seasonal change means thinking and planning ahead, especially in a pandemic. Some things ministers can't control, but the government needs to be ready for the unexpected. Boris Johnson swept away most COVID restrictions in England in July, and for now, he remains confident.
The result of this vaccination campaign is that we have one of the most free societies and one of the most open economies in Europe. And that's why we're now sticking with our strategy. In essence, we're going to keep going.
With this, the vaccination programme. It began with Margaret Keenan in Coventry last December. Across the UK, the over 50s and vulnerable adults will be offered a third booster jab. 12 to 15-year-olds will be eligible for a vaccination too. Ministers hope that'll be enough to keep theatres like this,
if we go from here to here,
open as normal.
So we reopened for 6 weeks last year, then closed again, then reopened for 1 week, then closed again, and now we're about to reopen.
This production of The Great Gatsby has music, dancing and audience participation. Its producer is glad to be back.
The thing that I need and the entire culture sector needs is just the opportunity to do our jobs, and to trade our way out of this. I feel a lot more certain today than I have in the past. I'm sure that there will be more uncertainty to come.
And that uncertainty has led the government to come up with what it calls Plan B for England. It could include the return of mandatory face masks in some indoor settings. Working from home would again be recommended, and COVID passports required for people going to certain venues, including nightclubs, to prove they've had 2 jabs.
It's just not sensible to rule out completely this kind of option now, when we must face the fact that it might still make the difference between keeping businesses open at full capacity or not.
Could you tell us in what circumstances you would impose those extra restrictions, your Plan B? Do you have a number of cases, a number of hospital admissions, which would mean that we've passed that threshold?
We're confident we can proceed with Plan A, but I think what I would stress about Plan B is that it contains a number of different shots in the locker, and you wouldn't necessarily play them all at once. Far from it. You'd want to do things in a graduated way.
But his advisors seem to be recommending more urgency.
When you make a move, you have to go earlier than you think you want to, you have to go harder than you think you want to, and you need to make sure you've got the right geographical coverage. So if this goes in the wrong direction and cases go up, followed by hospitalisations, it's important that the measures are put in place early enough and they're significant enough.
Labour said the government's approach would be judged against
whether we can push infections down, minimise sickness and save lives, keep schools open, protect care homes, maintain access to all care in the National Health Service and avoid a winter lockdown.
The Scottish Parliament has already voted to introduce COVID passports for some settings from the start of next month.
While none of us like these things, we are or would be irresponsible not to take advantage of all of the different levers that we have at our disposal to try to push cases down.
No one wants a repeat of last winter. The hope is that vaccines will make the crucial difference this time. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
So just to underline, the vaccine booster programme will start next week in all parts of the UK. The booster is a third dose. It will be given at least 6 months after the second was administered. A dose of Pfizer or a half dose of Moderna, those are the preferred options for the boosters. Care home staff and residents will be among priority groups. Our health editor Hugh Pym has more details.
At a carpentry class in Surrey for men who've retired, it was clear there was enthusiasm about the prospect of having a booster COVID jab.
I think the whole scheme is good, and I think I feel better for having my jabs. So yes, I'd have it immediately.
I always have a flu jab once a year, so I can't see there's going to be any problem having an extra booster.
I would have the booster jab, as I said, but I would like to know more about it.
And now it'll become a reality, with this age group among the first to get a third dose. The announcement coming from the Expert Vaccine Committee.
JCVI advises that adults who are more vulnerable to severe COVID-19 disease should be offered a booster vaccination in order to maintain a high level of protection through the next few months, so through this winter particularly.
Officials today used this chart to show how effective vaccines are at preventing people with COVID from needing hospital treatment. Among those aged 65 and over, they were more than 90% effective up to 9 weeks after a second dose. But they waned slightly the further away you got from that second jab. Medical regulators said it was safe to use AZ, Pfizer and Moderna as booster jabs, but the JCVI recommended Pfizer or a half dose of Moderna because they got the best immune responses, regardless of what had been given for the first 2 doses. Though if there were allergy problems, AZ could be used. At what point will double jabs start? COVID in one arm and flu in the other.
Double jabs can start now, subject to the availability of both products, and it may not always be the case that it is possible to co-administer all those 2 vaccines in every single patient. Sometimes it will be possible.
Officials pointed to data showing much lower COVID death rates among people who've been fully vaccinated, shown here in blue, compared to those who haven't been, here in red, especially among the under 70s. But the NHS is braced for some difficult months. Papers from the expert committee SAGE said there was the potential for another large wave of hospitalisations, with one factor being increased numbers returning to workplaces. Here in Croydon, like other hospitals, they're preparing for a busy time ahead.
Perfectly honestly, it feels like winter's come pretty early this year, and the real concern is, of course, as we move into winter proper, what the impact might be across the NHS.
The message from health leaders is that the pandemic is still active and winter could well be bumpy at times. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Let's have a look then at the latest official figures on the pandemic in the UK, showing there were 26,628 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. It means an average of just under 33,000 new cases per day in the past week. Hospital numbers continue to rise. There were more than 8,400 100 people in hospital yesterday, highest number since early March. 185 deaths were reported in the latest 24-hour period, people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. And so the average number of deaths per day in the past week is now 138. Looking at the vaccinations, just over 89% of people in the UK aged 16 or over have had the first jab, and just over 81% are now double vaccinated. So with me in the studio once again is our medical editor, Fergus Walsh. Let's talk about the programme announced today, Fergus. Some people asking, if you're talking about 30 million doses of booster vaccination, is that the best use of all of that medicine?
Well, the very old and the very vulnerable have got the most to gain from having a booster, and they are going to save some lives this winter and ease some pressure on the NHS. But the benefit from the boosters is much less than you get from the first 2 doses of vaccine. And you get to healthy people in their 50s, and the benefits of a booster really are marginal. And some scientists really say instead of 3rd doses for the few, we should be concentrating on first doses for the billions worldwide who haven't seen a vaccine yet. Only around 3 in 100 people across Africa have had a single dose of vaccine. But many wealthy nations, not just the UK, Israel, the US and others, have either started boosters or are planning them.
Another question being asked by quite a few people today, it's to do with the brand of the vaccine, if you like, when we talk about these boosters and other forms of vaccination. Pfizer and Moderna being focused on, not AstraZeneca. Now, why is that?
Yes, not the vaccine that was developed here. Now, that's because I understand the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is already not used in the under 40s because of this rare risk of a blood clot, that is the reason why it's not been chosen for boosters. But bear in mind that nearly 50 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine have been delivered in the UK. It saved more lives here than Pfizer and Moderna put together. And the jury's still out on which of the 3 vaccines give the longest lasting protection. So the vaccine may have very little role here in the UK in future where it was developed, but it has a huge role to play internationally. 1.2 billion doses of this not-for-profit vaccine have already been distributed.
Fergus, once again, many thanks to Fergus Walsh, our medical editor there with his latest analysis. Let's have a summary then of the plans so far in Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland, because we were focusing on England just now. In Scotland from Monday, 12 to 15-year-olds will be able to get vaccinated initially in vaccine centres rather than schools, which the First Minister says will allow parents to be able to ask questions. The booster programme will start at the same time, and COVID passports for nightclubs and large events will come into force in Scotland on the 1st of October. In Wales, booster jabs for the over 50s and vaccinations for 12 to 15-year-olds will also start next week, and boosters will be given to care residents and staff and NHS workers first. The Welsh Government wants to vaccinate all 12 to 15-year-olds who want the jab by October half-term. And in Northern Ireland, parents will soon be receiving consent forms for children aged from 12 to 15 to be given COVID vaccinations in schools. Around 1 in 10 children were absent from school last week, with large numbers isolating. The Public Health Agency is taking over from teachers to operate track and trace for schools. Now, government scientists have warned that the UK is entering the autumn with more COVID cases, more hospitalisations and more deaths than this time last year. A year ago, Nottingham had one of the highest COVID infection rates in the UK. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth has been asking people there about the challenges of the coming months.
With the rain coming down, the approaching autumn felt inescapable in Nottingham today, bringing with it uncertainty. In this city centre coffee shop, owner Michelangelo hopes colder weather doesn't mean a return to too many COVID rules. Face masks and vigilance are fine as long as he can stay open.
We have given the vaccine to so many people. I think we should get over with it and really start looking forward.
Steph, who's a regular here, shares a similar view. She lost her husband to COVID in January, but she's still optimistic.
I'm beginning to enjoy getting back to life as it should be. The toolkit is the right way to go. I think the government has a job to do to persuade the small proportion of the population who are still not getting vaccinated to get vaccinated.
Here, as in Westminster, a lot of faith is being put in the vaccine programme. Nilla, a student here last year who's about to start her master's, hopes it'll mean more face-to-face teaching, but does accept there may be limits if things take a turn.
Being at home and looking at a PowerPoint presentation on my screen hasn't really been the holistic learning that I wanted to have when I came to uni. So I think I would be disappointed, but at the same time, I'd rather we take every action that we possibly could to minimise the cases.
When the students returned last year, Nottingham was hard hit by a surge in COVID cases. Now things are moving again. Most, of course, wanted to stay that way.
We've been making progress down the road to recovery.
This local climbing centre struggled with lockdowns and restrictions, so the owner watched closely today as the government set out its plan.
It was quite low-key, saying they're not going to do anything radical, so but big up the vaccinations, which is a good idea. Our staff can't work at home. They've got to be here climbing. I think mandatory masks fine.
There is pragmatism here about the unpredictable nature of the pandemic, though some are unsure whether planned measures will be enough.
A lot of it depends on if there's any new variants in and how the new variants respond to the vaccine, so it's very difficult to predict.
I'm going to be 50-50. I don't know which way it could go. Some sort of plan is better than no plan, for sure.
COVID has undoubtedly proved difficult to navigate. A lot now is resting on the government's next steps. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Nottingham.
And just to remind you, there's much more information on the BBC News website, including all you need to know about who's been offered vaccinations over the coming months. Just head to bbc.co.uk/news and you'll see all the sections there for you. Now, job vacancies throughout the UK have hit a record high as the economic recovery continues, according to official figures. The number of vacancies in the 3 months to August rose above 1 million for the first time since records began back in 2001, with labour shortages in some key UK industries. Official figures also show the number of UK workers on the payroll rose by 241,000 in August, taking it to 29.1 million people in work. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, has more details.
It's harvest time, and that means all hands on deck in Britain's farms, and particularly so this year. The good news is that the reopening of the economy has brought demand back, all the jobs back, and the need to hire, to harvest the wheat and the barley from the ground.
So this should have left the farm in July and be in a pint glass.
Arable farmer Dan Wallace sold this 300-tonne consignment to a brewer weeks ago, but due to shortages, there's no transport for it. The situation not a great deal better for wheat.
Whether it be soft fruit or wheat for bread, there is a finite window. If it's not harvested in that time, it will spoil, it won't make the grade. But finding enough people to drive kit, tractors, harvesting, whatever it might be, it's very, very hard.
All this is a consequence of a jobs market doing much better than anyone forecast or dared to hope during lockdown. The tax authorities counted 1 million fewer people registered on payrolls less than a year ago during the pandemic, but that has now fully recovered.
I would say there is a lot of reason for optimism about jobs, whether it's entry-level jobs or more experienced jobs. There's absolutely work available for people right now.
In Thatcham's high street windows, like most towns and cities up and down the country, signs of the time, requests for workers. Just outside town, a delivery firm offering big incentives for those with the right skills. There are two huge and unprecedented factors in the jobs market right now. On the one hand, the record vacancies and shortages, not just in lorry cabs. On the other hand, tens, hundreds of thousands of workers returning from the furlough scheme, hopefully straight back into the workforce. Could these two problems solve each other? The industry's sceptical that could happen quickly enough. Here at GIST, they say, well, they can pay up. Across the industry, the pandemic, post-Brexit visa rules and self-employed tax changes mean there just aren't enough workers. Can't you just train up some of the hundreds of thousands of people, for example, coming off furlough by the end of the month?
Well, I mean, the government have announced last week an additional 50,000 test slots were going to be made available in the next year, which is helpful in itself, but certainly isn't going to fix the problem. And if the government, as they appear not to want to, are not prepared to offer EU nationals with temporary worker visas to come and drive these commercial vehicles, then they're going to have to take further action. Something else is going to need to be done.
As the economy and demand for workers returns to normal far more quickly than expected, shortages and the end of the furlough scheme remain challenges. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
The UK is to delay a number of post-Brexit import checks on food and agricultural products arriving in England, Scotland and Wales from the European Union. Ministers have blamed disruption caused by the pandemic. The checks were due to start next month. The EU has implemented full checks on goods coming from the UK since the start of the year. In Afghanistan, where the Taliban seized control of government over 3 weeks ago, thousands of women are still unsure whether they'll be allowed to return to work. New rules are being announced every day, including restrictions on women's role in society. During the past 20 years of international engagement, women were able to assume new roles. Some of them